Thanks for tuning in to the Jurassic Park cast, the Jurassic Park podcast where guests chat with me about Michael Crichton's 1990 novel Jurassic Park. And also not that too.
I'm so sick of it all. I feel like
A big shout out to Christoph Oakes of Snale, and a big thank you to him for letting me use his band's music to score this podcast, and you can find his music on Spotify and Bandcamp. Please hear out this clip from episode 69, John Hammond, where I continue my comparative review of the film Jurassic Park scene by scene and identifying which elements the script has borrowed from the novel. Here's the excerpt. Alright, and in terms of looking at the film and continuing to compare the novel against what Spielberg put into his 1993 blockbuster Jurassic Park, we're going to move on to the introduction of John Hammond. Alright, we got Grant and Sattler walking up a hill, and Sattler says, "Hey, Alan, if you want to scare the kid, you could have pulled a gun on him, you know." "Yeah, I know. Kids. You want to have one of those?" "I don't want that kid, but a breed of child Dr. Grant could be intriguing. I mean, what's so wrong with kids?" "Oh, Ellie, look. They're noisy, they're messy, they're expensive. Cheap. They smell?" "They do not smell. Some of them smell. Give me a break. Babies smell." And then a helicopter descends, blowing dust over the site. They don't like that. "Cover the site," says Ellie. "Cover up the dig. Tell them to shut down. Shut down. Cut the machine. Cover it up. Pull it over." They put jackets over the skeletons. And then Alan is yelling at the pilot, yelling over the noise. "Will you cut it out, will you? Shut it out. Shut it down." And the pilot's going, "What?" Grant runs towards a trailer, punching away a pair of jeans, and he goes in to see someone rummaging through their mini fridge. Grant says, "What the hell do you think you're doing in here?" And Hammond jumps up with a bottle of champagne in one hand, and he pops the cork like it's a celebration. A slightly guilty look on his face. Grant ducks to avoid the cork. "Hey, we were saving that for today. I guarantee it." "Who in God's name do you think you are?" "John Hammond. And I'm delighted to meet you finally in person, Dr. Grant." Hammond shakes Grant's finger and blows a cloud of sand and dirt off. "So I can see my $50,000 a year. It's been well spent." "Hammond. Okay, who's the jerk?" "This is our paleobotanist, Dr. Sattler." "Sattler. Ellie, this is Mr. Hammond." "Sorry about my dramatic entrance, Dr. Sattler. We're in a bit of a hurry." Did I say jerk?" "We should have a drink. We don't want it to get warm. Come along, sit down. I'll get a glass or two. It's a... Oh, no. I can manage it. I know my way around the kitchen. Now, I'll get right to the point. I like you. Both of you. I can tell instantly about people. It's a gift. I own an island off the coast of Costa Rica. I've leased it from the government and spent the last 5 years setting up a kind of biological preserve. Really spectacular. Spat no expense. Makes the one I've got down in Kenya look like a petting zoo. There's no doubt about it. Our attractions will drive kids out of their minds. And what are those? Small versions of adults, honey. And Grant sends her an unimpressed look. And it's not just kids, everyone. We're going to open the next year. That is, if the lawyers don't kill me first. I don't care for lawyers, do you? We don't really know any. Well, I do, I'm afraid. There's a particular pebble in my shoe represents my investors. Says he insists on outside opinions. What kind of opinions? Well, your kind, not to put too fine a point on it. I mean, let's face it, in your particular field, you're the top minds. If I could just persuade you to sign off on the park, well, give it your endorsement, maybe pan a wee testimony, I could get back on schedule. Why would they care what we think? What kind of park is this? It's right up your alley. I tell you what, why don't you come down, just a pair of you for the weekend? I'd love to have the opinion of a paleobotanist as well. I've got a jet standing by in Chateau. I'm sorry, this is impossible. We just dug up a new skeleton. I could compensate you by fully funding your dig. And this is a very unusual time. The timing is for a further 3 years. Grant and Sattler are taken aback by this offer. Where's the plane? Grant and Sattler hug each other giddily. So there we go. That's what you get in the film. And in Koepp's first draft, what do we have here? You know, it's basically the same. But we get a little bit different here. So Grant and Ellie are returning to the skeleton, and Ellie hurries to catch up with Grant. You know, if you really wanted to scare that kid, you could have just pulled a gun on him. Yeah, I know. You know, kids. You want to have one of those? Well, not one of those. Well, possibly one at some point could be a good thing. What's wrong with kids? Oh, Ellie, look. They're noisy. They're messy. They're sticky. They're expensive. Cheap, cheap, cheap. They smell. Oh my God, they don't smell. They do smell. Some of them smell. Babies smell. And here's some new exciting content for you. Ellie says, all right, the one in the airplane had an accident, but usually babies don't smell. Grant says, they know very little about the Jurassic period. They know less about the Cretaceous. The what? The Cretaceous. Anything else you will fossil? Yeah, plenty. Some of them can't walk. It frustrates me so much that I love you, that I need to strangle you right now, says Ellie. And Ellie playfully takes Grant's hat off and gives him a big tight hug. And then they kiss. A strange wind seems to be whipping up. Grant and Ellie look around confused, and the wind is getting stronger, blowing dirt and sand everywhere. So there we go. All of that was edited out of the final draft. All that hugging and kissing and baby talk. What do we got here? Then down at the base camp, the helicopter has landed. The pilot is already out, waiting as Grant comes down from the mountaintop like Moses, steaming. Did Moses return to everyone from the mountaintop? Was he angry? Grant gestures wildly at him to turn the chopper off. And the pilot points timidly to a mobile home across the camp. And Grant runs to the trailer, and that trailer slaps open, and Grant storms in. So the dialogue, basically for the rest of the scene, is terrifically similar. The only real novel elements for you may be in the stage direction. So here are some of the directions the script has provided for us. Trailer serves as the dig's office. There are several long wooden tables set up, every inch covered with bone specimens that are neatly laid out, tagged, and labeled. Farther along are ceramic dishes and crocks, soaking other bones in acid and vinegar. There's old dusty furniture at one end of the trailer and a refrigerator. And a man roots around in the refrigerator with his back to us, grumbling about the contents, which are mostly beer. And his hand falls across a bottle of expensive champagne in the back, and the man says, aha! And he pulls it out, and the cork pops. The man turns around, it's John Hammond, 70-ish, is sprightly as hell, with bright shining eyes that say, follow me. So that's John Hammond, written down for you guys. What else here? Some directions on how Hammond is intended to have moved. As Hammond moves, they notice he walks with a slight limp and uses a cane. For balance or style, it's hard to say which. Well, if he's got a limp, it's not for style. And as he's working through the kitchen, Ellie and Grant look at each other, and they're aback. They're affronted by this guy's bravado, and they sit down, and Hammond dries some glasses for them to drink out of. So they're kind of offended by his bravado. Those things are written into it. And then in terms of Malia Scotch Marmo's draft, she doesn't do any more content before introducing Nedry, so we'll skip this part of her script. Recall they already have plans to meet with Hammond in her script. As we went over in episode 68, The Badlands, Hammond had sent a limousine for them, and they are aware that they're on their way to inspect his Costa Rican resort. So those details were hammered out in her script already. Wait till you see how Hammond is presented to everyone in her version of this script. It is something. All right, the novel. In the novel, Grant doesn't scare a kid, and Sadler and he do not chat about having kids, nor does she kiss him or anything like that. This relationship was built into the movie, not the book. Even Spielberg downplayed their romantic connection significantly in the final cut. You can tell by the stuff that was in, Koepp's draft, that stuff that was edited out. Spielberg needed less romance. He didn't want that for the two of them. Grant is a widower whose wife died, quote, a long time ago, we're told in 235. And Sadler is, quote, marrying a nice doctor in Chicago sometime next year. And I'd like to think that gentleman was an ER doctor at County General Hospital in Chicago, where Michael Crichton's hit television show ER was set. I bet you it was one of those cast members. I don't know which one. Probably not George Clooney. But that's just me. So, they are a professor and student, nothing more. There might be some fantasy there for Grant, as when Tim asks about their relationship, Grant smiled in the darkness. No, she's my student. And that smile is doing a lot of work in terms of coloring how we read that next line. Grant might just think the child is naive, or that the idea is funny, or he might have a genuine love for Sadler that he knows he couldn't and wouldn't act upon. Maybe. Grant smiled in the darkness. That's a smile just for him. It's too dark. Nobody else can see it. No, she's my student. So their relationship is not true to the novel. There is no helicopter visiting the site, but rather it's Bob Morris from the Environmental Protection Agency who comes to ask about John Hammond, and of course he arrives in a rental car, a blue Ford sedan, which doesn't blow dust and cause confusion at the dig site as the helicopter does. However, there is a discussion on protecting fossils that is in the novel. So all of the dramatic things where they're yelling, hey, protect the fossils. That's in the book. Look, Grant said, I've got a plane to catch and I want a fossil protected before I go. Once you began to expose a fossil, you had to continue or risk losing it. Visitors imagined the landscape of the Badlands being unchanging, but in fact it was continuously eroding, literally right before your eyes. All day long you could hear the clatter of pebbles rolling down the crumbling hillside. There was always the risk of a rainstorm. Even a brief shower would wash away a delicate fossil. Thus, Grant's partially exposed skeleton was at risk, and it had to be protected until he returned. Fossil protection ordinarily consisted of a tarp over the site and a trench around the perimeter to control water runoff. The question was how large a trench the velociraptor fossil required. That's all on page 55. But this is obviously after Hammond has convinced them to visit his resort, not before. Now, Bob Morris and Grant do go into the trailer to chat and drink alcohol, though instead of champagne, Grant is further characterized as being informal, and everyone gets to drink a few beers instead. The script says the trailer is the dig's office, and there are, quote, several long wooden tables set up, every inch covered with bone specimens that are neatly laid out, tagged, and labeled. Farther along are ceramic dishes and crocks soaking other bones in acid and vinegar. There's old dusty furniture at one end of the trailer and a refrigerator. The novel agrees with this. The trailer had a series of long wooden tables with tiny bone specimens neatly laid out, tagged, and labeled. That's identical. Farther along were ceramic dishes and crocks. There was a strong odor of vinegar, exactly the same as related on page 34. Grant's office, which is at the other end of the trailer, has a, quote, torn couch, a sagging chair, and a battered end table, which is essentially the same as the, quote, dusty old furniture at one end of the trailer and a refrigerator that was in the script. So in the script, this trailer is almost perfectly authentic to the novel. Good for them. Now meeting Hammond, this case of mistaken identity, that's not in the book. Rather, Morris and Grant talk about Hammond, and we learn about the guy that way. Hammond offers grants to field expeditions, like Alan Grant's. He has the Hammond Foundation, which also provides funding for paleontological stuff. And Grant says he's only met Hammond once or twice, who, quote, comes here for brief visits. He's quite elderly, you know, and eccentric, the way rich people sometimes are, but always very enthusiastic, we're told on page 35. Grant reveals that he was providing some consultancy on juvenile hadrosaurs based on his Maiasaura discoveries for InGen, but quit after it became weird and intrusive. Was it for InGen or for the Hammond Foundation? It doesn't matter. Same guy. Hammond is described as a, quote, dinosaur nut, and Morris implies that he's sinister in some way, evading the EPA and other government bodies so he can do some unspoken, likely illegal thing without anyone watching. And Morris concludes, we don't have any evidence of wrongdoing. But personally, I think it's clear John Hammond is evading the law, on page 39. Now, Hammond's recruitment of Grant and Sattler is performed over the phone, not in a house call. And Hammond invites Grant to come to be a safety inspector on page 46. He says, in the screenplay, I own an island off the coast of Costa Rica. I've leased it from the government and spent the last 5 years setting up a kind of biological preserve. Really spectacular, spat no expense. Makes the one I've got down in Kenya look like a petting zoo. There's no doubt our attractions will drive kids out of their minds. Which is similar to the novel. Oh yes, we bought it and started our operation 4 or 5 years ago now. I forget exactly. Called Isla Nublar, big island, 100 miles offshore. Going to be a biological preserve. Wonderful place. Tropical jungle. You know. You ought to see it, Dr. Grant, on page 46. And also, Hammond does not have a biological preserve in Kenya in the novel. In the novel, Robert Muldoon is the, quote, famous white hunter from Nairobi, on page 98. And Nairobi apparently is reporting medical successes which are making the Tropical Diseases Lab in New York, where Alice Levin discovers the Procomsignathus specimen, quote, a less important place than it once was, on page 23. And that's all Kenya really has to do with Jurassic Park, the novel. But the sameness is that, quote, they spent 4 to 5 years in construction, and he needs inspectors to sign off on it so that lawyers will get off his back. That is true to the novel. The film, Hammond says, we're going to open next year. That is if the lawyers don't kill me first. I don't care for lawyers, do you? And this is true. Quote, the attraction isn't open to tourists yet, but it will be in a year, Gennaro says on page 88. So the next summer, I guess. And we know the lawyers are threatening to shut Jurassic Park down. Recall Gennaro's instructions were, but let's be very clear about one thing. I don't know how bad this situation actually is, Donald, but if there's a problem on that island, burn it to the ground on page 58. Don't hesitate. Don't think about it. Just do it. So the legal pressures are true to the novel. A final characterization of this meeting is also true to the novel is that Hammond is being deceiving in his approach to the consultants. He wants to make this appear like a special visit for VIPs, and that the tour is his idea, whereas he's being compelled by his investors to show proof of concept, or they're pulling the plug. Passing this inspection is literally make or break for Hammond. It's not an excursion. But that's how it's portrayed in the film, and that's what Crichton writes in his book. Quote, Hammond has to place the calls himself. I think he wants to pretend that he's not in trouble, that it's just a social invitation, showing off his island, on page 50. In the film, Hammond is bright and ebullient and apparently just being a genuinely good-souled gentleman who wants to invite some cool people to see his island. But in the book, he's being duplicitous and underhanded. He's hiding that there are grave and serious dangers on this island and wants to fabricate an illusion that it's just a social invitation. That's dishonest and true to his character. We don't get that in the film. Finally, Hammond's financial support secures Grant's commitment to the inspection, and Sattler is sort of thrown in for good measure too. That is the same in the novel as in the film. John Hammond says, "Well, I do, I'm afraid." In terms of knowing lawyers, "There's a particular pebble in my shoe, represents my investors, says they insist on outside opinions." What kind? Well, your kind, not to put too fine a point on it. I mean, let's face it, in your particular fields, you're the top minds, and if I could just persuade you to sign off on the park, well, give it your endorsement, maybe a panel-y testimony, I could be back on schedule. Why don't you come down, just a pair of you, for the weekend? I'd love to have your opinion. I'd love to have the opinion of a paleobotanist as well. I've got a jet standing by at Chateau. I could compensate you by fully funding your dig for a further 3 years. And this is kind of the same in the novel. Quote, "Well, we've had our problems and some delays. Let's just say that I'm under a little pressure here, and I'd like you to look at the island for me. Give me your opinion. I'll be paying you the usual weekend consultant rate of $20,000 a day. That'd be $60,000 for 3 days. And if you can spare Dr. Sattler, she'll go at the same rate. We need a botanist. What do you say?" On page 48. Ellie looked at Grant and she said, "Well, Mr. Hammond, that much money would fully finance our expeditions for the next 2 summers. It's also true that they meet their ride in Chateau. That seems to be in all the scripts too, but the big part of the ominous moments in this chapter is Grant's revelation to Hammond that they've just discovered the remains of a rediscovered Procopsognathus, which was faxed to them from New York, and this distracts Hammond and derails their conversation. He's on the speakerphone. Hammond coughs and says, "Dr. Grant, have you told any about it yet?" "No." Good, that's good. "Well, yeah. I tell you frankly, Dr. Grant, I'm having a little problem about this island. This EPA thing is coming at just the wrong time." And then Hammond basically throws $120,000 at the two of them to shut up about the Procopsognathus remains and get to the island right away, on a whim. The end. So the tone and depth of the story in the novel is much stronger than the film, but the film lets Hammond remain sprightly as hell, with bright shining eyes and say, "Follow me," as listed in the stage directions in the script. There you go. Hammond gets to be a good guy, but Hammond's really kind of a bad guy. Depends if you're looking at the movie or reading the book. All right, a big thank you to you for tuning in. If you're interested in more of the podcast, you can find it wherever podcasts are, and just look for Jurassic Park Cast, include those hyphens, or Jurassic Park Podcast. That might work too. And if you like the videos, you can like and subscribe and receive notifications when a new one is available. There's a lot more to come. Until next time.